everyone, and welcome to the Lord Gord Podcast. This is your host, Lord Gord. I'm giving you information that's factually correct and politically incorrect. Ba-da-ba, ba-dee-ya, ba-ya-ba-ba. Ba-ba-ba-ba-ya-day. So this week, I'm going to be talking about prices, the role of prices in a free market economy, and the issues that arise when government imposes price controls. I, for one, love free market economics. People like Thomas Sowell and Milton Friedman and Walter Williams really changed my life in the way that I view economics, prices, how resources are allocated, and how wealth is created. So let's get into this. Prices are financial signals that incentivize and affect the behavior of producers and consumers. Consumers, obviously, are the people who purchase goods and services, including producers themselves. If you're a producer of CDs, not only do you have to consume, CDs from you're producing the CDs. You not only have to consume the products needed to create the CDs, but you also have to consume something else entirely that people often leave out the equation, which is labor. So let's keep going. Why prices are important. Prices incentivize and deter consumption and production. Prices also convey the inherent scarcity and cost of goods. Producers have to use scarce resources that have alternative uses carefully because they can lose big if they don't do that. They also have to compete with other producers that are doing the same. That is the reason why prices fall in the free market. So for example, say you have McDonald's and you have Burger King. Okay? They both have to buy beef, lettuce, tomatoes, buns, pickles, ketchup, mustard, soda, so on and so forth. So they have to be very conscientious as to how much of those goods that they purchase, because they're using their money. And if they purchase more goods than they can sell, they're going to lose money, because keeping items in inventory costs money. And if Burger King isn't careful with the way that they spend their money, and McDonald's is much better at not only selling hamburgers, but getting the price down and being fiscally responsible, then Burger King is going to have a hard time competing with McDonald's. I was thinking of something else along these lines. The Nintendo Switch was selling like hotcakes, and to my knowledge it still is. But it uses a similar component that iPhones use, I believe. So now the Nintendo Switch's producer, Nintendo, has to compete with Apple for that component that goes into both. So either Nintendo is going to pay the higher price that they need to get that product, therefore selling more Nintendo Switches. Apple is going to spend more money buying that product, or the producer of that product is going to just have to ramp up the production of their product, because you have an inordinate demand from both sides. So the resources will go to whoever uses them best. If Nintendo can sell more Switches than Apple can sell iPhones, they are more likely to bid higher for that scarce resource and use it. And if they're wrong, they lose big. That's going to affect their bottom line. That's going to make the shareholders very, very angry. So they're not going to want to do that. So let's keep going here. When we talk about prices are also the reason why free markets produce the best products in the world. that's due to competition. If one guy has a lemonade stand and he's selling lemonade for $2, another guy comes, he's able to use the same materials in a more efficient manner, so he can sell his lemonade for $1. Depending on whose lemonade they like best, people are going to choose between the $2 lemonade or the $1 lemonade. But if there wasn't that competitor, that one lemonade stand could make mediocre lemonade, and all lemonade lovers would have to go to him. I mean, this happens with virtually everything. Here's another example of that. In India, India had protective tariffs on a car that was produced in India. And this car was notorious for being bad. It was poorly constructed. It got poor gas mileage. It was just an all-around bad car. But you had people on waiting lists to get this car. Not because the car was great and it was a great use of resources and people really coveted that car among all other cars, but it was because that was the only car available. So once India started reducing the tariffs and the burdensome regulations and started growing their economy at about 7% a year, surprise, surprise, the producer of that car started making better cars. And the reason is that now that he has competitors that can make better cars than him, he either A, starts making better cars than them, or making cars that are comparable to them at a lower price, which would entice consumers on a budget to buy his product, or go out of business. And most times, between going out of business and revamping their business to make money, most people choose to revamp their business. All right. Something else I said here. When you have to pay for the consequences of your decisions, you make good decisions or get eliminated. That is the problem with government overall. Like I said, if you're a bad hamburger stand, if you're buying a lot more beef than you can sell, and you're losing a lot of money, and that makes you unable to afford soda or enough employees to staff the place, that hurts you. So you have every incentive to know your limits and know your restraints and consume what is in your budget. But when you're government, like a school district, for example, you get the money from the taxpayer. So whether you do your job well or not, the money keeps flowing in regardless. You know, the most inefficient use of resources is a monopoly, whether it's in the private sector or the government sector. But it's funny how people can acknowledge that monopolies in the private sector are a bad thing, but monopolies in the government sector must be protected, even though they use resources poorly and usually give people horrible products. Consumers have to consume carefully because of prices. Yes, I mean even business people, they have to consume carefully when it comes to buying goods and materials to run their business. When it comes to who they hire, because labor is a product that they have to buy. And when you're spending your own money, you want to hire the best and most competent people so you can run a decent business. And if you spend your own money hiring incompetent people, the negative effects of that decision are going to rear their head very quickly, unlike government. In government, a lot of incompetent people can be hidden, and the effects are borne by the taxpayer. Consumers make individual decisions about what they need and want. If they make bad decisions, they feel the consequences of it. Also, when something is priced for less, you get more consumption. When something has a higher price, you get less consumption. And when it comes to business people or salespeople, they'll supply more goods when they're selling at a higher price, and they'll supply less goods when they're selling at a lower price. So when it comes to consumption being high when the prices are low, and it being lower when the prices are high, think about sales. You know, how do stores get people to spend money? They sell something at a manufacturer's suggested retail price, and after they've decided, or the market has borne out, how many people are willing to buy that product at the listed price, then they either lower the price or they have a surplus of the good. Because if they don't lower the price, it's going to cost money to have those goods sitting around in inventory. So they'll lower the price to either get it out at a much smaller profit, or even just to break even so they can invest in something else that will make them more money. Also, that comes with taxes and tax rates. They have something called the Laffer curve. At some point, once you raise taxes past a certain point, tax revenues start to go down. I explained this on another podcast, but when presidents like Reagan, JFK, and George H.W. Bush lowered the tax rate, they received higher tax revenues. I remember reading about Woodrow Wilson, and at one point he had a tax rate of over 70% for the rich, and very few of them paid it. But once he lowered the tax rate to about 28%, more of them paid it, and he received more revenue. When the tax rate was about 70%, he received about $700 million in tax revenue, but when he lowered it to 28%, he received over $1 billion in revenue. So let's talk about some of the problems with minimum wage laws, rent control laws, and other price controls. So minimum wage laws are a classic example of price floors. When you implement a price floor, you get a surplus, and in the case of minimum wage laws, you get a surplus of labor. Let me give you some examples. Labor participation rates were higher for blacks from the late 19th century to the mid 20th century because of the lack of minimum wage laws. The black unemployment rate was lower than the white unemployment rate until 1931, when the Davis-Bacon Act was passed. Laws like the National Labor Relations Act of 1935 priced blacks out of jobs, cost them about 500,000 jobs in the southern textile industry. Black teenage unemployment in 1948 was 9.4%. The average black teen unemployment rate from 1971 to 2016 was 36.6%. This is also true in South Africa. The racist white unions were advocating for minimum wage laws and equal pay for equal work laws, and their reasoning was very explicit. They said they didn't want the blacks to get hired. White construction workers would be hiring blacks under the union rate because business people are consumers like we do, and we want to get bang for our buck. We want to get the most value while spending the least amount of money. So, of course, that goes into the business realm. So the white construction workers weren't happy with that. So they lobbied for these laws to price blacks out the market. I mean, this is one of the many reasons why I dislike the minimum wage law. It limits the options of low skilled, low income people, and even people who are looking for part-time work. And it also places a burden on the business. It forces the business to pay a certain rate regardless of productivity. So if you raise the minimum wage to $20 an hour, that doesn't change the fact that businesses are going to want to pay people who can return that kind of value that they're spending. It prices a lot of people out of jobs when you raise the minimum wage. The evidence on that is pretty clear. In European countries like France and Italy, the young adult unemployment rate is over 20% because of the high minimum wages and all the government mandated benefits that are forced onto businesses to give to workers, and that amounts to a higher price. So I just said, when prices are higher, you get less consumption. When prices are lower, you get more consumption. So I'm not a fan of the minimum wage laws at all. So many jobs have been destroyed. The kids who used to fill up your gas, check your oil, that's gone. Ushers leading you to your seat, that's gone. Just little helpers around these stores are gone. And the big problem about these minimum wage laws is it creates unemployment, that's one. And two, it cuts people off from rising up the economic ladder, especially when they're low scaled and they have horrible or education imparted onto them by the government schools. So because of the minimum wage law, people who normally be able to find employment in the free market are not able to find employment. So let's keep going. I'm going to give you more examples of price floors like the minimum wage law. FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, destroyed tons of food during the Great Depression to keep food prices at pre-depression levels. You know, all the farmers and workers had incentives to lower their price in the free market because of the depression. But the government came in and said, you know what? No, we are not going to let the prices of our food fall. So any surplus that you have, we're going to buy. And in order to keep the prices at that level, they had to keep the food scarce. So they destroyed it all. That's similar to what happens with the minimum wage law, but it happens to actual human beings. You have tons of jobs that people could work, 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, even 20-year-olds, people who've never worked a job before. And because of our laws, we cut them out the labor market and we tell them, if you can't produce $10 or $15 or whatever arbitrary number you want to draw up, if you can't produce that value, you will not be hired. Period. And also, when you raise the wage rates artificially, either those jobs stop being created or our business owners invest in capital to displace those workers because the capital will be cheaper over time. I'm already seeing it in places like Ralph's. They have clerks and they have self-checkout. And the self-checkout technology is pretty good. It works every time I use it. And these people aren't greedy or they're not evil. They're just allocating scarce resources which have alternative uses in an efficient manner. Why would you pay someone $15 or $20 an hour to scan items and bag groceries? That's not a good use of resources. The value that they create does not amount to what you're spending for their labor. I mean, we can also segue into pay and productivity. In a free market, people are paid in concordance to what they produce. They're also paid to how scarce their skills are. And prices in the labor market, just like prices when you're consuming goods, incentivize behavior. There's a reason why doctors get paid a lot more than janitors. They get paid more because doctors have to stay in school longer. They have more valuable skills. They produce more value for the society than janitors. So if we switched around the pricing, if we created this distortion in the market where we paid janitors a doctor's salary and doctors a janitor's salary, you have a surplus of people who are willing to become janitors, and you have an extreme scarcity of people who want to become doctors. I mean, if you can get paid $100,000 plus a year for mopping and cleaning up vomit in toilets, a lot of people would do that. And if you only got paid $20,000 a year to go to school for 8, 9, 10 years and to do the stressful, mentally taxing work of being a doctor, you wouldn't have doctors. And then you have to ask yourself, would the society be better off if more people went into janitorial work than doctor work? And the answer is no. That's why prices are so important in a free market. No one sets these prices on the top down for these occupations. The salaries for these occupations are set by producers of the product, which are the doctors themselves, and the consumers, which are, the patients, the hospitals, so on. And so forth. So a lot of people demanding for more money, more money, more money, they have to look at the bottom line and say, hey, we're making X amount of dollars doing this job. Let's look at other people who do this job. Are they making more money than us, less money than us, or the same amount of money? Then you also have to think about the job that you're doing and the amount of value that you're producing. I was reading this in South Africa. They moved a lot of the manufacturing of tiger toys, I believe. They moved it to Indonesia. Even though the South African workers were two times as productive as the Indonesian workers, the South African workers had to be paid 5 times as much as the Indonesian workers. So they lost jobs. In a free market, you say, okay, since we produce twice as much as the Indonesian workers, you can pay us twice as much. And the business people will be like, okay, that's fine. But when you're only twice as productive, but you want 5 times the money, that's a losing proposition for the business people. So they just won't hire you. So let's just keep this going. Let's talk about price ceilings. Examples of price ceilings includes rent control laws. When you cap the price of an item, you will get a shortage because there's less incentive to produce the product at the artificially set price. What initially happens is a surge in consumption of the product, and then shortages follow. The reason for the shortage is that investors cannot make a profit off the buildings at a set price. As a result, less housing is built and the problem becomes even worse than before. Let's give some examples. 9 years after World War II, not a single apartment had been built in Melbourne, Australia, because rent control laws made such buildings unprofitable. Rent control was imposed in Egypt in 1960, and the results were an end to investments in apartment buildings and a shortage in housing. Rent control laws were passed in Santa Monica in 1979, and building permits declined to less than 1/10 of what they were 5 years earlier. And you can repeat that ad nauseum in places like New York, San Francisco, wherever you want to repeat them. This is the same problem with government health care. Government health care, they can artificially lower the price, but they cannot lower cost. If the people working in the profession have every incentive to get the goods out at affordable prices, but they can't, what makes you think that an ignorant, incompetent government bureaucracy can do the same? Everywhere where government healthcare is introduced, you get an initial uptick in the use of the product because the price is artificially lowered. So that means that the hospitals, the clinics, and the doctors are overtaxed. Because they can't make as much money as they would in the free market, they start closing off the supply. And then what government has to do is they have to ration the tools. They have to ration out doctors. They put you on long waiting lists. And since not as much profit is made by the hospitals and the clinics and the medical industry, they are not able to invest in new technologies and new medical innovations that would be helpful. I think I heard this one time that the United States produces about 3/4 of all the advancements in medical technology. And the reason is because we have a relatively free market in the medical industry. I mean, we have a lot of government intervention, a lot of fascism dictated from Washington and telling people what they have to buy in terms of insurance, what insurance providers have to provide, what doctors have to charge, so on and so forth. I mean, even in California, I've seen the same kind of con game, the same kind of economic chicanery being used. I read that in Sacramento, the leftist Democrats of California are trying to pass a bill that would allow them to control prices that doctors can charge. They would control the prices of insurance plans, and that would help curb costs and healthcare. So that's the problem. They're conflating prices and costs. Costs are, the human capital, the physical capital, so on and so forth to produce the product. The price is what is set by the producers of the product and the consumers. That's what the price is. So you can go in and set the price at whatever you want, but that doesn't mean that the producer will continue to produce the product at that price. Let me give you an example. Imagine you have some political demagogue who says, new cars are right, new cars are right. And they tell all car manufacturers that they can't sell cars for more than $10,000. Say you can't sell a new car for more than $10,000. What would initially happen is all the cars on the market will be bought up instantly. I mean, you have families buying 3, 4, 5 cars because they're much cheaper than they'd normally be. And then after that, you'd have a huge shortage in cars because no car manufacturer would be able to make a profit selling brand new cars at $10,000. So, and if they try to do that, say the car costs $15,000 to make, and they're forced to sell it for $10,000, they're losing $5,000 on every car. I mean, once you sell 100 or 1,000 cars, you're going to be in the hole big time. Your company could be done. So what did government do? They distorted the market. They disturbed the allocation of resources, and they cut off the supply of the goods. I mean, this happened with the oil embargo. I believe it was Nixon. He set prices on the oil. He said gas can't be sold at a price higher than this. It's a price ceiling. There was an initial uptick in consumption. Everybody was buying gas because it's cheaper. And then the suppliers cut off the supply of gas because they can no longer make any money selling the gas. So what they do with that gas? They were supplying it to consumers who were willing to pay the high price at that time. And the reason why the price was high is because there was a shortage in oil. And there's nothing that you can do to stop the shortage. You can refuse to pay the costs, or you can artificially set prices and people would just stop supplying the product. So what I'm trying to say is price ceilings, price floors, any kind of price control are bad news in a free market economy. If my favorite book company starts selling books at $50 a book and people stop buying it, then they either are going to lower the price of their book, or they're going to have a competitor come in and sell books at a lower price, which drives them out of business. Producers can't set the price at whatever they want. Prices aren't arbitrary. You can't go around saying, I'm going to sell a PlayStation 4 for $3,000. I mean, you can say that, but the reality is prices are only what consumers are willing to pay. And that's true whether it's in the labor market, the mating market, the food market, whatever. Let me just give one last example before I close this whole thing out on prices. I did a podcast earlier on the mating market. You can check that out. And I've been listening to people talking about some of these career women who have these unrealistic expectations of men. They say, I don't want a man under 6 feet. He has to make 6 figures. He has to look like a movie star, and he has to acquiesce to all my infantile demands, so on and so forth. And those women, they can set their price. It's a free market. You can set your price, and I'll defend your right to set your price. But then you can't get upset when no one wants to consume your product at that price. No man wants to consume the product at that price, because the kind of men that you're looking for, they are coveted. And they can use their value to get women that are younger than you, and they're prettier than you, and they're less mouthy than you. So realistically, if you want a mate, you either have to lower your price, or you stay single. So you get a lot of these career women, they're in their 30s talking about, oh, being single. Oh, it's such a bad thing. Men, they're so bad these days. And then you look at their demands, and you quickly understand why their product is not being consumed. Imagine going to McDonald's, and McDonald's starts selling hamburgers for $30 a burger. That would be insane. It doesn't matter how much you like McDonald's hamburgers. Most sane people are not going to spend $30 on a McDonald's hamburger. So what are they going to do? They're going to go to another burger supplier. They're going to get a burger for cheaper. Or if they're burgers that are sold for $30, those burgers are probably much higher in quality than McDonald's burgers. So if I have two girls, one's 22 and she's beautiful. The other one is 32 and she's not as beautiful. And she has these crazy demands. And they're at the same price. I'm going with the 22-year-old. So we can go right back to the minimum wage law. This is the reason why people should be free to set their prices. If you have two people, one person has 5 years of experience flipping burgers. The other one has no experience. This one says, hey, pay me $10. This one would say, hey, I'm unexperienced. Pay me $6. But the law says that you have to pay them at least $10. You're not going to hire the person who's willing to work for $6, even if you would want to hire him and he'd want to be hired by you. That goes to my other podcast about the insidious of social justice. You have a self-anointed elite dictating how others should live their lives. So in sum, when they talk about prices, they incentivize behavior. They guide resources to their most efficient uses. And they affect the supply and demand of goods and services. If you look at any successful functioning economy in the world, you look at the ones that are closer to absolute free market values and the ones closer to, dependency theory, socialist, Marxist crap. The places where people have the highest standard of living, where there's the highest GDP, where there's the highest percentage of economic growth annually, so on and so forth, they go to the countries with the freer markets. Look at Chile. Chile has what I believe to be the highest GDP in South America, and when you compare it to mixed economies like Argentina and outward socialist hellholes like Venezuela, the Chileans have a much higher standard of living, and they have a much higher per capita income, and their GDP growth is much higher. If you look at places like Singapore and Hong Kong and compare it to places in Western Europe or places like Greece with large governments, with a large dependent class and a lot of regulations and tariffs, so on and so forth, the higher standard of living, the highest per capita income, the most economic freedom goes to places like Singapore and Hong Kong. So in sum, you have to let prices do what they do. The market is dictated not only by producers, but consumers. If someone produces a product and they sell it at a certain price and no one is willing to pay that price, they either have to find a way to get the cost down so it can sell it at a lower price, or they go out of business. The incentives and deterrents in the free market are, at least when there's competition, are more than enough to keep people in line. You make money by servicing your fellow man. You make money by pleasing your fellow man. And as I have explained, whenever government or a third party in general gets in the way of the natural systemic processes that set prices, you get chaos, dysfunction, starvation, unemployment, on and on and on and on. One last point before I go. In the Soviet Union, the centralized government was trying to set 24 million prices. There's no human being in the history of the world that can set 24 million prices. It's been tried before. We see planned centralized economies controlled by government compared to free market economies that let producers and consumers make their own individual decisions. The evidence is overwhelming in the favor of free markets. Freedom, liberty, personal choice. That's what I stand for. I don't want someone else who pays no price in making decisions for me. If someone wants to discriminate, let them pay the price of discrimination. I don't want government discriminating because they don't pay the price. We pay the price. All right? That's the Lord Gord Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on iTunes, subscribe on Podbean. Share it with your friends. Get the message out there. If you're in LA, come to the Blues Jam every Tuesday night at the Airliner from 9 p.m. to midnight. Free admission. It's 21 and over. $1 tacos. Come enjoy some music. Come have a good time. Get the Lord Gord album. This Isn't TV on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, whatever, what have you. Next week, I'm going to talk about O.J. Simpson and American individualism. I'm going to talk about how when I was a leftist, I didn't like O.J. saying the fact that he wasn't black, he was O.J. And now that I have seen the light and I'm on the side of free markets and individual responsibility, that message was a message that blacks should have adhered to instead of subscribing to the socialist, leftist, collectivist mindset and depending on government to get them out of their problems. I'm Lord Gord. I'll talk to you next time.